This is Terrible at Fishing with your host Michael Ruffino, giving you this week's fishing report. I know it. What a great week this is. 4th of July week, and we got a lot of good fishing out there. Let's go. Let's just talk about where you can catch a lot of good fish. So at Emigrant Lake over in Ashland, if you're out there, I would definitely go for some crappie, but definitely the big bass are hitting. So go for largemouth. Bladed jigs work really good out there. Both at Hyatt and at Howard's Prairie, bladed jigs and swim baits will also work very well in those lakes. So if you're over on Dead Indian Road, you've got some great fishing if you go with some bladed jigs and some swim baits. As over in Medford, Agate Lake, a great lake for bluegill and largemouth bass, but the bluegill are hitting very, very well. Go very small, use a bobber, 3 to 5 foot down below, small jig, a little power bait, have at it, and just enjoy catching and cooking up those bluegills and panfish that you'll be catching out there. Over at Willow Lake, over on the east side, you'll be working that area for some largemouth bass. So get close to the shore. There's some nice cubbies in there, and you can catch some nice largemouth bass over there. Their panfish are hitting very good, especially their perch. Lots of perch in that lake. Fish Lake, go a little deeper out there with a 3 to 5 foot leader for your rainbow trout. As for Lake of the Woods, it's warming up nicely, so topwater is starting to hit. You're going to see some large smallmouth and largemouth bass starting to break surface out there. Huge schools of tiny little largemouth bass too, and smallmouth bass. So they just finished their spawn, and the water's at 70 degrees right there. You're going to enjoy working the shoreline and over on the flat parts in order to catch some fantastic bass on the topwater and the upper water column. You're going to find the rainbow trout at about 20 feet. So work your water bobbers down at about 20 feet, and you'll be catching all the rainbows there too. As for Gerber Lake, great panfish fishing out there. So work that little lake south of Bonanza and Willow Valley. South of that, you're going to be working some 3 to 4 pound largemouth bass out along the shoreline there. As for Lost Creek Lake, you're going to work over by the dam in order to catch largemouth bass, and the trout are again going to be deeper there. So enjoy this week and catch tons of fish. To troll or not to troll? That is the question. Now, when I have a hard time with this answer too. Typically, whenever I move my boat to a new fishing spot, I always troll, because I always feel like I got to have a line in the water. Well, people troll all the time. Sometimes they troll too fast. Sometimes they troll in the wrong spot. So I first have to ask, me, I just want a line in the water when I'm moving from one spot to another. And if I catch something, good for me. But some people, this is the way they fish. They troll a lot. And I guess if you don't have a fish finder, this is how you find the fish. But sometimes they troll in the wrong spot. So last week I was at Lake of the Woods, and people were trying to catch trout. Well, they were in water that was, mostly smallmouth bass, because it was too shallow for trout right now. So they had to move, and I told them, just move about 25 yards out. You'll find the drop off, and 20 feet down, because I just saw a whole bunch of trout there, and you guys can catch it. Some people troll in the shallower area hoping they'll get a trout. Well, again, I've harped on this more than once, is water temperature. And water temperature will tell you where your fish are, whether the warm water fish are deep or shallow, or cold water fish are deep or shallow. And then understand, the depths of the lake around you. Now, right now, the trout are deep. They're about 20 feet, typically. And warmer waters are going to be 20 feet deep, and they're going to be working that area. So you want to run your troll in a way that, one, your bait can stay 20 feet. So something called a downrigger. What's a downrigger? Well, a downrigger kind of looks like a hoist on your boat. It's got a crank, it's got an arm out there, and you put a heavy weight on the line, and that allows the line to stay down as you move your boat. But that's not your fishing line. Your fishing line is actually hooked up to a quick release switch or mechanism. So your line is going to follow this heavy line down, and it's going to hold your bait and your line down at a certain depth. That's called a downrigger. And when you get a bite, the quick release mechanism lets go of your line so you can reel in the fish. When you are trolling, typically, you either need heavy weight if you want to stay down deep, or you need a fish finder so you can find the fish and just work that area. Downriggers are common for cold water fish and warm water. So the salmon, the kokanee salmon, or the trout this time of year. Downriggers are one of those things that help if you're trolling. Now, if you're not trolling, this is something that you can work an area thoroughly instead of motoring right by it. So, is trolling better than working an area? Well, trolling works a bigger area, just doesn't work it thoroughly. So, sometimes trolling works out better, sometimes it doesn't. But typically, if you want to catch more fish, know where the fish are, typically, anchor, and work the area methodically. And I work an area like clockwork, literally. I cast at 12 o'clock, at 2 o'clock, at 4 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, etc., etc. And then with my bait. And then I may change the depth of my bait. So I'll do it again. Boom, 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 all the way around me, working a different depth. And then I may work it at a different speed of retrieve all the way around me. And when you work an area, casting it, you're able to truly be thorough. And you'll probably catch more fish. That's for sure. The trolling method is scenic, but it's not thorough. Now, there are some things like kokanee salmon. People troll with a flashing system. It's a lots of brightly, reflective panels on your line in order to get the fish's attention. And that's how you fish for kokanee. But salmon, the trout, they're not so flashy. So typically, if you want to work an area, the water bobber technique, which I have told you about with the 3 to 5 foot leader, works really, really well. You can't troll with that. You just throw it out there and work an area. And if you got a multi-pole license, a multi-rod license, you can put 2 rods in 2 different areas. And you can just wait until they hit. And it works really, really well. And, you can read a book while your fish are finding your bait. The trolling method, I enjoy the trolling method. So I like both of them. But one requires skill, and the other one, luck. And that's kind of what trolling does. Trolling is sort of relying on luck for you to find a fish. And when you anchor and work an area, that requires your skill. You have to outthink a fish. You got to think like the fish. You got to, work and present your bait in a much more methodical way. You may even have to switch your bait. You may troll with the wrong bait. It's just not that day for that color. And so you wouldn't know that until after you've gone a few miles. And you've wasted gas or you've wasted battery charge. And it's just, I think this is what I would suggest. Work an area. Find out what the fish want. And then after you start catching fish and you've exhausted the area, troll with that bait, that color, to your next area. And this is what I do. I always have a line in the water. I just think it's silly to be in the lake and not have a line in the water. So find out what the fish want by working an area. Now, this time of year, if you're going trout fishing, you want to find that 20-foot depth. That's where they're at. If you are fishing bass, then you're going to be working the shoreline. And if you want smallmouth bass, you're going to be working rocky bottoms. If you want largemouth bass, you want good cover, things like, trees, lumber underneath there, and lots of vegetation. So those are the areas that you're going to be working. Now, water temperature has a lot to do with this. I mean, we're about to head into topwater season for bass. It's going to hit any day now. When the water's 70 degrees, topwater starts working really, really well. So now you're going to try different presentations on top of the water. You might try a spook or a walking bait, a wake bait, a whopper plopper, hollow bodies, lots of different presentations and baits out on the market for the for topwater. Use swim baits, but use them in the top of the water column, and I love doing that too. I love using swim baits in the upper water column in order to get a fish to bite. And yet, nice thing too about swim baits is that you can vary. They're slow sinking, and so you can work different depths. So if the water's 68 degrees, you can still get them by just going 2 feet deep. If the water's 70 degrees, you can just make it swim right below the surface, right on the surface. It's really a much more tactical, strategic way of fishing. So in our next segment, we're going to talk more about specific species this time of year and where you can find it. So I want you to stay tuned, because our next segment, we're going to be talking about crappie and panfish, bluegills, the yellow perch, which is technically a panfish. Doesn't look like a panfish, but it's there. But I want you to sort of stay tuned after our following messages, and go out there. And pan fishing is the easiest fish to catch, and crappie is the best tasting fish in the water. So stay tuned, and let's see what I have in store to get you a lot of fish in the boat. Welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. Well, pumpkin seed sunfish, black crappie, white crappie, all sorts of different panfish is out there, perch. And there are bluegill. Let's not forget bluegill. There are certain lakes here in the area that are really good at certain one of these. Now, Lake of the Woods has a lot of black crappie, but nothing. I mean, this last week I caught a 10-inch, and that's a good sized crappie. But there are some lakes that actually regularly give you a 10-inch crappie. Things like Immigrant Lakes in Ashland. Immigrant Lake is probably the best crappie lake I've ever run across. Another crappie lake that is very good is over by Bonanza, and that's Gerber Lake. A bluegill lake. Now, you don't get too many bluegills here in the area. You just really don't. But Agate Lake over in Medford has good bluegill. Pumpkin seed sunfish. Now, the pumpkin seed sunfish, probably the prettiest fish that you'll ever lay your eyes on in our area. It is absolutely stunning. And you can catch the pumpkin seed over at Gerber as well. And these are really good fish. Now, the crappie is one of my favorite fish to clean and to eat. Bluegill too. And it makes great fish tacos. It makes great fish sandwiches. Put it on salad. Just do what you want with. It's really delicious meat. And a very easy fish to clean. So, how do you catch them? So, well, I'm going to tell you. And I've given you these hints before, these techniques before. But with panfish, you're going to use a very small hook. A 10 or 12. And those particular hooks are tiny. And you're going to put a very small little soft plastic on it. Just a little itty bitty thingy. And you could buy something called crappie jigs. And a crappie jig's small. Put a little plastic on it. And does the color of plastic work? Yeah. I mean, I like using like a chartreuse, limetreuse, or even white for these soft plastics. And I'll put it on the hook and I'll just drop it down into the water, into an area where there's good cover. Around docks, awesome. Gotta love catching crappie around docks because they love that stuff. And if you go to Lake of the Woods, you can look under the dock and see 50 crappie hanging out just under it. Can't fish from those docks, but that's where I think they know that. Also, they like to be suspended 5 or so feet below the surface. They don't like to be on the bottom of the lake. They like to be somewhere in the middle, in about a 10-foot column. They like to swim in the middle. Crappie cannot see below them. Panfish can't see below them. So you have to fish above them. So using a bobber works very well. So if you throw a bobber out there with a 3 to 5 foot leader on it, and just throw it out there with a crappie jig, and maybe you might want to try power bait. They like power bait. That's a great way to go crappie fishing. When I was younger, we were able to use minnows. Excuse me, you didn't drink. And minnows were a guaranteed crappie killer. But you can't do that. We don't use live bait anymore unless you use a worm. Worm's the only live bait you're allowed to use. So with crappie, you want to fish in that 3 to 5 foot below the surface and use a bobber. Or jig it. If you have a fish finder, you'll see large schools of them, or just look in the water and you'll see them, and just jig it. Just drop your line in there and bounce it up and down a little bit and catch it. Now, over at Immigrant, one of my favorite spots is where the scullers, people, those really long rowboats that people use, there's a ramp there, and a little farther down the shoreline, there's a green spot on the hill. That is a guaranteed crappie area. It's just you just pull them up all day long. There's no limit on crappie. You can catch as much as you want and have a pan fry good fish fry for all your friends. Agate Lake, there's a lot of good areas around Agate Lake just to catch those bluegills. And in Gerber, near the dam. Those are great spots to find these fish. I have a hard time killing a pumpkin seed sunfish because they're just so pretty. They're not really that big either, but they're so pretty. I mean, you just want to take a picture of it and then just use it as a screensaver. And then put it back in the water. But crappie fishing is one of the most enjoyable fishings that you will do. And they're fast. And they're violent. So when they hit, they can release just as fast. So your reflexes have to be very, very quick. They're what we call a paper mouth. So you're not going to yank on it like you would a largemouth bass. You're just going to lift up on your tip and set that hook. And then reel before they can spit it out. Because they're really good at that. And they vibrate. I mean, when they come up, and these things like, remember the old term fish out of water? Well, that's where they are in the water. But they can pose you a pretty good challenge in you setting the hook and getting them out of the water. And that's just the fun part about crappie fishing. Not only is it plentiful, but it keeps you on your toes. And crappie fishing is like that. Now, you can cast out there and swim that bait shallow, but typically, well, not too shallow. I usually tell people to wait 5 seconds, let it sink 5 seconds. That's about 5 feet. Reel it in, pause it, and let it drop another 2 seconds. Reel it in, drop 2 seconds, etc., etc. This technique is very, very good to work an area, and they usually will get it on the drop. Every time you reel in, you're going to gain elevation on your bait. It's going to come towards the surface. That's why it's just going to, you're almost doing a sawtooth retrieve on the way back. And so you're going to pull it up and then drop it. Pull it up and then drop it. And that's what you're going to do, but you're not going to let it touch bottom. If you let it touch bottom, typically yellow perch is you can just put a little bit of worm or power bait on a hook, drop it to the bottom of the lake, and pull it up, pull the tip up a foot. And before you know it, you'll have a perch. There shouldn't be a reason why you get skunked this time of year, because the fish that are plentiful are biting easily. If you fish 1 foot off the bottom of, let's say, Lake of the Woods, I mean, they have a fishing derby where the winner with the most perch catches 130 of them. So, give or take. Usually that's what they catch. I think last year it was 150. You can catch a perch. Everybody can. If you take children fishing, they don't care what kind of fish that they catch. They just want to catch a fish. So, get a little crappie jig, put a little bit of worm on it or power bait. You drop it down to the bottom of the lake and lift up the tip about 12 inches and just wait. And in a few minutes, they'll catch a fish. And it'll be a perch. It might be a big one, it might be a little one. We don't know. But over at Gerber, they have big perch. Again, Gerber's a great panfish lake. Really good panfish lake. Lake of the Woods has a lot of them, but nothing of real big size. I mean, I actually caught a good 10, 11-inch perch. But, I mean, you just don't get that. And that's an oddity, at Lake of the Woods. So, at Gerber Lake, you get a lot more edible panfish. But do that next time you take the children out and you want to see the elation of them catching a fish. Again, make it simple. Just drop a jig down to the bottom of the lake and lift up. I remember one time I was on my kayak a few years ago on Lake of the Woods. And I was coming along the shoreline and fishing it. I saw this little boy in his paddle boat. They have a cabin, a house on the lake. And he was crying. And I was like, as I paddled over to him, I go, what's going on? And he was crying because he couldn't catch a fish. So I looked on his hook and I said, all right. So I tied on a crappie jig for him out of my tackle. And I baggied up a little bit of power bait for him out of my bottle. And I put the power bait on his hook. I gave him the power bait. I says, watch what I'm doing. So I roll it up in my hand, nice tight ball. And I put it on the hook. I go, now just drop it down to the bottom of the lake. And so he goes until he has slack. I'm going to go, now lift your tip up And about when he did that, he got a bite. And he reeled it up, and the boy went from sorrow to elation. And his dad was watching this fat old guy talking to his boy out there on the lake. So I paddled over to his dad over on his dock and told him who I was. And he thanked me. And his son had everything he needed to continue catching fish. This is my favorite part of fishing. It's not me catching fish, although I do a pretty good job at it, but it's helping others catch fish, seeing the wonderment and the magic and the awe in them. I remember these two girls. They were probably 20 years old. They were fishing on their dock, but they didn't know what they were doing. So I did pretty much the same thing for them. 'Cause people just want to catch fish, right? And so you got to make it easy. So I did the exact same thing for them. And I taught them how to cast it out from their dock and then how to reel back, in that sawtooth manner that I just got done explaining to you. And in a few minutes, one of the girls caught a fish. She took pictures with it. The girls were excited. This is what fishing is all about. It's about memories. And I've said this over and over and over again. We all have a memory that we hold with great fondness in our minds. And fishing allows an avenue to have that memory implanted in there. Those girls and that little boy and so many other people that when I'm out on the lake, I assist and I make sure that they're catching fish. And to see them catch a fish is magic to me. It's a moment that I remember. I remember these moments. And if I remember these moments, I know they will remember those moments. It's just one of those things. To all my listeners out there, never be selfish. Be generous with your knowledge and with your the tools of your trade, and teach people how to fish, and they will just have a new hobby that they can enjoy for the rest of their life. Poor or rich, it doesn't matter. I did it with a hook, a string, and sand dabs when I was a kid. And driftwood. You don't have to have a lot of money. You just have to have a little bit of time and the love of the outdoors. Welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. Well, I thought I'd tackle, literally tackle. I'm talking fishing here too, not football. Although I did play football when I was younger. But get back on the point, Mike. Should we use lures or should we use bait? Oh, this is like a discussion that will rile people up. It's which one should one use? Bait fishermen are going to say, they're going to say you get so much more with using bait. And lure fishermen are going to say the same thing, except about lures. Now, I'm a little biased, of course, because I'm a lure fisherman. I do bait fishing. I mean, I grew up with bait fishing. What's the difference between bait and lures? Well, bait is kind of a stationary type of fishing. You just throw it out there and you wait. Lure fishing, you're working a larger area and you're presenting the bait every cast, maybe perhaps differently. With bait fishing, you're presenting the bait one way, but perhaps at different levels, different depths. Which is most effective? Well, it depends on the fish that you're shooting for, to be honest. The most effective way to catch a trout that I have seen in lakes has been bait fishing. So you've heard me say it over and over again. Use a water bobber with a 3 to 5 foot leader. Fill it with water, no air whatsoever. Just fill it with water. Just dunk it down under the water, submerge it, and then just fill it up. Put it on your line with a 3 to 5 foot leader. That is the most effective way to catch a trout. Well, what about other stuff? Well, how about perch? A perch, again, probably bait fishing with 1 foot off bottom. And you can catch as many perch as you want. Crappie. This is sort of in between. But crappie, you could use a bobber, a surface bobber, 3 to 5 foot leader, and boom, you can catch crappie all day long. So I would probably say that bait fishing for crappie is really, really good. So you're thinking, Mike, why do you use lures? When you've just said that pan fishing, bait fishing is better, trout bait fishing is better. I go, well, because I don't primarily do either one of those things. I actually like bass. You guys know that. And I make lures. I mold lures, I paint lures, hard ones, soft ones. I love using lures. Now, why do I love using lures? Well, lures are the best way to catch bass, both smallmouth and largemouth. It's the best way to catch them. But lures are a different challenge that one would have given to themselves. So you've heard me say bait presentation. Presenting the bait in front of the fish is crucial for the fish to be attracted to eat it or to defend itself against it. And a lure is a different way of presenting a threat or a food to a fish. And nice thing too about lures is that you get to work a larger area of the lake. So you throw your bobbers out there, whether it be a water bobber or a surface bobber. You throw it out there, and that's the area that bait is going to work. That's it. That's you're kind of confined to it. Now with a lure, I could throw it, 100 feet and work anything between me and 100 feet. And I move it like clockwork. So I'll throw it at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, et cetera, all the way around me. And then I will change the depth. I will change the method of retrieve. And then I'm changing the presentation. For me, I'm not saying that this is the best thing for everybody, but for me, it's fun. It's just a more fun way of fishing because it's challenging me, and it's challenging the catch of the fish. So this is very, for me, entertaining. So I may try a swim bait. I may try a square bill. I may try a deep dive. I may try a soft plastic. I may try all these different things in order to attract and to catch a bass. And bass are smart, and I've told you this over and over again. They have instinctive memories. If they've been caught once, they won't be caught twice the same way. The other day, I was fishing a common area over at Lake of the Woods, and this good 2.5, 3 pound smallmouth kept breaking surface. All right. Well, I caught a 2.5 pounder there. So it's probably the same fish that I caught a few weeks ago. But this fish was tormenting me. So I anchored my boat and I'm tossing. So I tried a square bill. I tried a shallow dive. I tried soft plastics. I said, all right, well, if you're breaking surface, I'm going to go with topwater. So I threw different topwaters at it. That's the fun of lures. Because you got a fish with a brains the size of your your fingernail or less, outsmarting you, and it's driving you crazy. And you got this big old brain, and mine's old and damaged, but I still think I'm smarter than that fish. And in the end, sometimes the fish outsmarts me. And it's kind of insulting, if you ask me. But a lure will, to be honest, lures cost money. So, I make lures, and boy, I am just hanging around me right now in my studio. I have hundreds of lures hanging around me. And I've got my molds, I've got my plastics, I've got all these paints and dyes and different types of, airbrush stencils, all these things around me, all so I can catch a fish. Or for you to catch a fish. I make spinners, I make this, I know, it's crazy. But a bass fisherman, we probably go out on the lake with at least 100 lures. It's probably what we're going out on the lake with. And the reason being is that could be that smallmouth bass that was tormenting me the other day. He's going to require a whole lot of different lures, or just one. It's just, and that's the challenge of it. So it's very interactive. Lures are very interactive. You are working it, you are throwing it, you are counting down in order to drop it down to different levels. You're retrieving it in different methods. I kind of like the sawtooth method, to where you pull it up, you let it sink, you pull it, you let it drop, you pull it, you let it drop, and that's kind of the sawtooth method. And that is one of my favorite retrieves. So people will see me out there catching fish, and it really is the way I'm pulling that bait back to me that is actually catching the fish. And lures allow me to practice over and over and over again. And every lure has a personality to it. So I was fishing with a new lure that I created, and it looks like an eggplant. I know, it's a crazy looking lure. And it requires a very slow retrieve speed. Now, I have some lures, like lipless cranks, they like to be burned through the water. They have a fast retrieve speed. And then I have swim baits that will vary on their retrieve speeds. When you use a lure, you have to throw it in front of you and learn what the lure wants, and then do different things with it in front of you before you toss it out of sight. And so what that lure is doing out in the water. That is very, very, very crucial in order to catch fish. You stay within the lure's personality in order to catch fish with that lure. And again, that's fun. It really is more fun. The reason I don't do bait fishing is because I don't like throwing it out there and waiting. I don't like doing it. I don't do drop shots because it's the same way. I seldom do Ned rigs, which is similar, although a little bit more action to them, but very little. And so there are certain methods I enjoy, and I love swim baits. I love lures. And because I get to interact with it, everything I do with my hand translates to the action of that particular lure in the water. And I know that if I catch it, it's because it's something I did, not because it ran across the bottom. The fish went across the bottom and said, oh, look, power bait, and it ate it. All right? That's satisfying for many, 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 many people. It is. And you catch fish with it. And that's fun, but I want some credit where credit is due. I want to feel like my brain, outsmarted that stupid little brain of a fish. And they've got tiny little brains. And you think, how can it outsmart me all the time? But I want to feel smarter than it. And I don't get to feel smart too often anymore. I mean, my kids are, Am I smarter than a fifth grader? No, but I'm wiser. I'm a firm believer that the older we get, we lose intelligence, but we gain wisdom. so, no, when I was in school, that was a long time ago. I'm a baby boomer, but we weren't allowed to use calculators. When calculators were invented and stuff like that. So, I'm that old. But I think we were smarter back then than these kids are today. But they're more gifted at using technology because we didn't have technology back then. But I'm a firm believer that as you get older, you may lose that intelligence of doing math and stuff like that. But you gain wisdom. And I would rather be wise than smart. So I would rather be wise than smart. And that's kind of but still, I want to feel smart. Fishing is a way that makes me feel smart. And when you use a lure, it's just one of those things. When you use a lure, you feel smart when you catch a fish because you did it. It wasn't just the lure. It was the way you operated the lure. So, in the end, bait fishing or lure fishing? Well, if you're young, you're probably already smart. So, all right, use baits. But for us old timers, we kind of want to feel smart every once in a while in a world that's smart around us. We know we're wise, but we need to defeat a fish once in a while. Their brains are so small. So, lure fishing makes me feel smart. So that's why I lure fish. It's the challenge and the insecurity of my intelligence. So, maybe this will give you a little bit of a reason of why I make baits and I bait or I make lures and I lure fish. So I hope this helps you. We'll see you in the next segment, guys. Tight lines to you. Welcome back to Terrible at Fishing. Well, I do have some news for you. So we're going to end the show in this last segment. We're going to talk about fishing hook selection. But I want to announce to you that I figured you guys are probably getting tired of listening to me for an entire hour. And I kind of miss bouncing stuff off of people. I know I can be a little sarcastic and I can, my sense of humor, can get a little tiring. So, we're going to move this show into a talk show. So I'm going to have a co-host, which you will meet next week. And we will just enjoy talking about fishing, interview local fishermen and other people. And you're going to tune in with, some banter about fishing instead of just hearing me banter with myself, which, even though I think I am the funniest guy I have ever met, because I make myself laugh all the time. But some people don't think I'm quite as funny as I think I am. So you're going to see in our next show, Fridays at 7, of course, you're going to hear a talk show and meet my new co-host. So it will be terrible at fishing still, but we'll be terrible at fishing as a team. So let's talk about hook selection. Oh my goodness. I make one swim bait that's 6 inches long, and it has an 8/0 hook on it. So it's 8/0. So we just say ought because somebody in the past said 0 is an ought. It ought to be 0. It is a big, giant hook. I have one swim bait that I didn't make, but it has a 10/0 hook. This is a massive hook. And people say, what are you going to catch, Mike, with that big, giant, massive hook? A shark? Which I go, nope. I'm going to catch a largemouth bass or a brown trout. They got big mouths. So typically when we choose a hook, we're almost choosing our fish. We really are. So The bigger the hook, the bigger the fish. The smaller the hook, the smaller the fish. Also, I have told you too that the smaller the bait, the more fish you catch, because there are more small fish in a fishery than there are large fish. But is there a sweet spot somewhere? Is there a sweet spot to where you can catch a large fish and a small fish, relatively speaking, in hook size? Well, there are those hook sizes that you can go ahead and use. So without the 0 on it, you're going to go with a very small number, like a 1, 2, or 4. Those are bigger hooks in that size range that can also catch a bigger fish. In the aught or the /0 range, a 1 would actually do very, very well to catch both big and small fish. A 1/0 hook is actually pretty big. So it's not going to catch too small a fish, but it will catch a smaller fish, like a half pounder. And then it's still capable of catching that 8 pounder, 10 pounder, or whatever. So in my swim baits, I do have paddle tails that are 2 inches long, 2¼ inch actually, that has a 1/0 hook on it. And it can catch a big bass and a small bass, and even larger rainbow trouts. I do have some 3-inch swim baits with a 3/0 or a 4/0 hook. Yes, those are big hooks, relatively speaking, but still able to catch a half a pounder on up. So when you choose a hook, you're kind of choosing your fish. So let's say a number 10 hook, very common size for trout, because trout have small mouths and panfish have small mouths. And so a number 10 or even as big as an 8 could actually do very, very well. Now, typically, as you go bigger in size, you are, again, increasing your hookup chances and also increasing the size of the possibility of fish. Now, you can catch some pretty big trout with a number 10, although I like using a number 8 on those. A number 6 hook is also a sort of a happy medium, but again, you're not going to catch panfish with a number 6 hook. You're going to catch trout and bass with a number 6 hook. Is this confusing to you? Remember what I've taught you. If it has a 0 after it, after the /, the bigger the number, the bigger the hook. If it doesn't have a 0 next to it, the bigger the number, the smaller the hook. Now, who thought of this? I don't know. According to my big fat Greek wedding, the Greeks invented it. I don't know. But I'm pretty sure the Greeks invented it. Me being Italian, Italians perfected it. So, if it doesn't have a 0, the bigger the number, the smaller the hook. If it has a 0 after a /, the bigger the number, the bigger the hook. And they get really big, really quick. Where without the 0, it's very gradual in the hook size. Now, I like using jigs. Now, a jig is a weighted hook. It's basically a hook with a head on it. And I slide on a soft plastic in order to give it that fish-like look. And by doing that, I can also have the hook upturned. So that allows me to pull it through the grass, bounce it off logs, things like that, where fish like to hide. Remember what I taught you too. Fish are ambush predators. They like to conceal themselves. Big fish, anyway. They can conceal themselves and then dart up out of their hiding place and hit their prey. Now, Another nice thing is that I like to go light. So I like to use 1/8 of an ounce. At heaviest, 1/4 ounce. The reason I like using light is that it sinks slowly. So if I toss it out there, the hook with the jig will start to sink slowly down the water column. Usually, fish like to hit things on the drop. In fact, get ready when that bait hits the water. Don't be surprised if immediately you get a fish on the hook. So let it drop slowly and then retrieve it. When you retrieve it, it's going to make its way up to the surface again. Stop, pause, drop. I call this my sawtooth method. On retrieve, I do what's called a sawtooth method, where I let it sink, I pull it up, I let it sink again. And so if you were to see it from the side, it's sort of it looks like a sawtooth. And that's kind of what I call it. I don't know if anybody else calls it the retrieve a sawtooth method, but it works very, very well. Also, I like paddle tails. A paddle tail is basically a flat tail that likes to wag a lot. It likes to wag a lot. And so the paddle tail is just flapping behind your bait. And it gives the bait a lot of life. I like to tug, just tug, while I retrieve in order to change directions of the bait. It'll dart the bait left and right underwater. Typically it will. Now some baits don't like to be tugged. You have to play with the bait in order to see if your bait likes to be tugged. But tugging it allows it to look like a flailing fish. And it gives it more attractiveness because it looks weak to a predator fish. So with choosing your hook, again, sort of review this a little bit. Choosing a hook will help you choose the size of fish and also the activity of that lure. So a jig, like a crappie jig, is very, very small. You know, it can, an ice jig, oh my goodness, an ice jig is super, 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 super small. But it tells you that you're going to catch more fish if it's going to be small. But you're not going to catch really big fish when it's tiny. Not usually. You can, but not usually. So as you choose your hooks, you're going to choose a hook to choose, how often it's going to be hitting and the size of the fish that you want to catch. Big hooks are going to catch big fish. It's just the way it is because little fish can't wrap their mouths around a big, giant hook. You just can't. Poor guy tries. And a lot of times you'll find, little fish will start to eat the plastic from the tail. And I've done that. I've actually pulled up fish that off the strength of their bite. They weren't even on the hook. They just clamped onto my bait, my soft plastic, and I pulled them in the boat. They were hanging on for dear life, literally. and that's kind of fun to see. But you lose, when you pull them up out of the water, they'll let loose. And you say, man. So if it doesn't have a 0 after it, remember, the bigger the number, the smaller the hook. If it has a /0, the bigger the number, the bigger the hook. And I like using good size hooks. I really do. Even my spinners have number 8s on them instead of 10s. And it increases my hookup chances. So I can still get the same size fish with the number 8. But it has a better barb on it, and I can actually keep the fish on it easier with a number 8 than a number 10. Now, the drawback is if it goes into your skin, it's harder to pull out. Bigger hooks are harder to pull out because they have bigger barbs. And I am sort of one of those guys that has hooked myself plenty. And working at the marina at Lake of the Woods, I have pulled out my share of hooks out of people. Let me give you a simple trick about pulling a hook that's past the barb, okay, in somebody's skin. I know it sounds gross. Ooh. And I'm a bleeder. I mean, I'm on blood thinners. I bleed like crazy. It just looks bad. When a hook is in the skin, I want you to take some fishing line. Any fishing line. Just take any fishing line. And wrap it around sort of loop it around the hook. So the hook is in the skin, wrap some fishing line out of it, and pull out the hook with the fishing line. Don't grab the hook with pliers. Don't grab the hook with your fingers. You let the fishing line pull the hook out of the skin. What that does is it removes the hook at the angle that it goes into the skin. So it pulls it out sort of at that same angle. And it's painless. Just looks bad. But using the fishing line method to remove a hook is the best method to removing a hook out of the flesh. And believe me, I've had my share. And I've used this exact same method with people with the hooks in their head, in their arms, in their thighs. It doesn't really matter where it is. I've used this method and it works every single time. So just use string to pull out the hook, not pliers. And if you want to see a way of doing this, just, Google it and you'll see videos on how to do it. So I want to thank you guys for supporting the show these past few weeks and look forward to our show. And it will be our show. I will have a co-host. I think you'll really enjoy him. I think we'll get along really, really well. And it'll be more fun, more informative, but definitely more entertaining. So thank you very much. Tight lines, get out there and fish because there's so much good fishing right now. Remember, top water is king at the moment. Tight lines, everybody.